We are, yes. Okay. Good evening and welcome to Hackney Council Chamber. First time in a year, and Hackney's Planning Committee. My name's Councillor Vincent Stopps and I shall be chairing this evening's meeting. The council will be recording the meetings and the meetings are being live streamed. We're now back to meeting in person, so we've got councillors here this evening. And they're not taking part remotely as we've done in the past year. But we will be undertaking this meeting in as close a fashion as we can to our normal format. The public are able to come along. We've got the applicants and objectors here this evening. The virtual meeting technology does allow us to switch you off if you misbehave. Please don't do so. When the camera is turned on you during the meeting, please ensure that you are visible. Participants who have registered their interest to speak in the meeting should only speak when invited by me. And again, there's notes about disruption. Please follow the chair's lead. If we do have any internet outage, we'll have to reconvene and we'll let you know what's going on. When it's addressed, we'll hopefully start again. I'll introduce members. So Councillor Chauhan, Councillor Bell, and Councillor Hanson. Do you want to switch to them to make sure people know they're in the room? There we are. We also have the head of planning, our legal officer, Christine, is over there, and the governance service officer, Andrew, whom some of you will have talked to about this meeting. There are planning and design transport officers. They're on conference call, so they'll be presenting to us via conference calls as and when necessary. As I say, the objectors and applicants are here in person this evening. Before moving on to the agenda, I'll take a couple of minutes to say how the meeting will proceed. We'll hear each application summarised by the officers, a 5-minute statement from the objectors, followed by a 5-minute statement from the applicant, and then members will be free to ask questions, etc. We have a councillor who's an objector this evening. He has his own 5 minutes. It's my role as chair to make sure members have all the information they need and to make a decision. Objectors and applicants have their say, and that the meeting runs properly. I'll not be taking any contributions from the floor, and this is a meeting in public, not a public meeting. You must have given notice to the governance service officer before the meeting if you wanted to register to speak. As I've said, you'll have strictly 5 minutes. Where there's 2 of you, I hope you will have decided how to divide that time up. Members are not representing either their wards nor their political parties. We make our decision on the basis of any site visits we've made, what we've read in the reports, and what we hear this evening. We must only take account of policies adopted by this council, other material planning policies and material considerations. I want to emphasise that members should not discuss nor take account of non-material planning matters. Members making the decision should not have allowed themselves to prejudge any application prior to the meeting. Similarly, if they have any interest in the application site, all the people involved, they'll need to declare that interest and may remove themselves from the decision. When we've finished our deliberation, we'll vote on the recommendation. When the decision is made, that's the end of the matter for the committee. The applicant may appeal our decision to the Secretary of State, and objectors may seek legal redress, but I'd advise you to seek professional advice in either case. Finally, we'll be taking a break because of the remote nature of some of our participants. I'm hoping about sort of between 8 and 8:30, we'll take a 5 or 10 minutes break. And we can now move to the agenda. This is the first meeting of the municipal year. So we just have to note that myself has been appointed by the full council as chair of this subcommittee, and Councillor Hanson the vice chair. We have terms of reference in our packs, and we need to note those. Is that okay? Noted. Thank you, members. They're noted. Apologies for absence. We've got a few for different reasons. We can go through them. Councillor Levy wrote to me. Has a bit of an issue that he had to deal with, so he's absent. Councillor Joseph has emailed me and said she's not available this evening, and Councillor Lynch couldn't substitute. Who else have we got? We've got
Councillor Potter.
Councillor Potter's away. It's a weekend of a week of school breaks. Garcia hasn't yet been trained because she's a new member, so she's not available. And Councillor Race is here as one of the objectors. So he will also effectively be apologising. I'll say something more just before he says something about his role this evening. Declarations of interest. I think we all know Steve, so he's a fellow councillor of ours, but we're alive to the issues that are involved, and I don't think there's a conflict of interest at all. It's not a personal issue for Steve either, as far as I know. But I will declare an interest as a fellow councillor, and I presume the same for other councillors. Is that okay, Christine? Thank you. Okay, nothing's been referred to me by the monitoring officer to speak of, so I think we can get on with this now to 209 to 223 Hoxton Street. Just one comment about Councillor Race's involvement. He is going to be an objector this evening, and because he's objecting to this item, our custom and practice is that he will leave the meeting and won't participate in the other items this evening. So he's just talking to us about his objection to this item, and then he will leave. So, okay, so it's now over to Barry, I think.
Thank you, Joe. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'll just present my screen. Can you see my screen?
I can.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I'm just going to turn on the pointer. Okay, this item relates to 209 to 223 Hoxton Street. The site is outlined in red in the image here. It's located on the corner of Hoxton Street and Purcell Street. The site is located within the Hoxton Street Conservation Area. There are also some listed buildings just to the north at 233 to 235 and 237 Hoxton Street. There's also a locally listed cupola within the Hoxton Gardens on the opposite side of the road. Hoxton Street's mainly characterised by retail at ground floor level and residential on the floors above, and the wider area is broadly residential in character. Let's go through some of the photographs. So this is the front elevation from the opposite side of Hoxton Street. You can see that the existing building on site is a single-storey structure currently occupied by a supermarket retailer and a pharmacy. This is another view from across the street on Stanway Street. Again, you can see the single-storey nature within the context. This is a view looking south down Hoxton Street. You can see here that the prevailing heights are in the region of 3 to 4 stories on Hoxton Street, and the single story on the side is quite unusual for the context. This is a view looking north up Hoxton Street. Again, you can see the site within its context, and also you can see the proximity of Hoxton Gardens on the opposite side of the street. This is a view showing the Purcell Street elevation. The existing retailer is currently serviced by a servicing yard to the rear. You can also see the proximity of nearby residential uses, including this block here to the west, and this block here, and then also some residential uses on the upper floors of buildings on Hoxton Street. This is an aerial view of the site. Again, you get an idea for the surrounding context and the grain and massing of the built form surrounding it. So roughly 3 to 4 stories along most of Hoxton Street, and then you can see the proximity of residential windows to the site, to the rear, and also the relationship with Hoxton Garden. Just briefly on this slide, I'll just talk through some of the background on this case because it's quite relevant, I think. So this case has already been to Planning Committee effectively in November 2019. So it received a resolution to grant planning permission from members. The scheme is virtually identical to the one you're seeing today. However, before that permission was issued, the council suffered a serious cyber attack, which meant that key application data was lost. As a result, the applicants were invited to resubmit the application, and a new consultation exercise was carried out. So basically, the application is identical in terms of its land uses, its design, massing, and the surrounding context is also broadly similar to when that resolution to grant was made. There has been a slight change in the policy context. So the local plan, Hackney's local plan, was adopted last year, and the London plan was published this year. So the overall policy thrust, as they relate to this site, is broadly similar, although there is some minor differences, which I'll mention a little later in the presentation, but are also covered in more detail in my officer's report. It's also worth pointing out that although the previous resolution to grant doesn't have planning permission, it doesn't have the same weight as a planning permission. It still remains a material planning consideration that members need to give due regard to when considering this application this evening. It's also worth pointing out that the documents that were submitted this time around have been fully updated to reflect the current policy context, and the viability assessment has been reassessed in line with current market conditions. This slide shows the existing ground floor use. So you can see how the existing supermarket retailer occupies the majority of the site, and they have a servicing yard to the west. And then you can also see that there's a small retail unit which was up until recently occupied by a pharmacy. This is the proposed ground floor, so you can see that a large retail unit is to be re-provided. Overall, the retail floor space is slightly increased, which is considered acceptable given the local shopping centre location of the site. The proposal would result in the loss of the small retail unit. So policy does seek to provide small retail units in retail developments of this size. However, in this case, given the nature of the surrounding context where there are already a large number of small independent retailers, and given the benefits that a large retailer brings to the vitality and vibrancy of the town centre, the loss of that unit is considered acceptable. This is also subject to a contribution of £30,000, which officers have secured in order to be put towards the general improvements in the immediate area and to support small retailers. It's thought that these two matters combined make the loss of the retail unit acceptable. It's noted that there's been a slight change in the wording of the relevant policy as it relates to the small independent unit. However, overall, it's not considered that this change would make the loss of the small retail unit unacceptable on this occasion. It's worth pointing out that this was found acceptable previously, and that the surrounding context has not changed significantly since then. At this point, I'd like to make a verbal addition to one of the conditions. There's a condition that restricts the retail use to the relevant part of use class E, but we'd like to amend that condition to extend it to restrict permitted development rights away from use class EA. So we can provide further detail on that, but just to make that verbal change now, if possible. Moving on to some of the floor plans. So this shows the basement level, which also includes some retail space, retail storage space, and the cycle parking. And then you can see the first floor level, which contains the residential units, the PRS units. Just running quickly through some of the layouts, you can see how the building is recessed in certain areas to break up the massing. You can also see the provision of landscaping at this podium level to some of the units to the rear there. Just moving through some of the other floor plans, you can see how the units are laid out. There's access from 2 cores. Each of the units meet the minimum space standards and have acceptable provision of daylight and private amenity space. This is a roof level view showing the 5th floor layout. Just briefly on the side elevation, so the north elevation is mostly blank, given that it abuts the building immediately to the north. The south elevation is the Purcell Street elevation. You can see how the building steps down away from the corner to address the context of residential buildings to the rear. And these are the front and rear elevations. You can see again how the 5-story element is on the corner, stepping down to 3 stories as it abuts the buildings to the north. You can also see the change in materiality and how this is intended to break up the bulk of the facade. You can see the rear elevation here as well, and the position of windows and balconies as they relate to the rear elevation. So just turning to the residential use briefly, as with the previous proposal, the proposal is for 25 PRS units to be provided. So that's private rented sector units. So these differ slightly from residential units in that they're all held by a single owner and held in the same management. And they're provided as self-contained units let separately for longer tenancies than are ordinarily the case for private sector rented units in the open market. So the benefits are that it provides greater security of tenancy, a better management, and also allows a more professional on-site management. A covenant is recommended in the obligations to secure this PRS use for 15 years, alongside other relevant clauses that relate to clawback. Just touching briefly on affordable housing on this slide as well. So we've secured 9 units of London Living Rent units. The local and regional policy in relation to PRS or build to rent schemes require affordable housing to be provided as London Living Rent due to the characteristics of the tenure in relation to PRS. So in this case, we've secured 9 units, which equates to 36% of the overall provision. This is considered to be the maximum reasonable amount that could be provided on the site, and is an updated assessment based on the previous application. On that occasion, 9 units were also found to be the maximum reasonable amount that could be provided. Just turning to the aerial views now, you can see the character of the scheme and how it relates to its surrounding context in terms of massing. This image here shows the relationship with surrounding buildings. Overall, the daylight, sunlight and privacy impacts have been assessed and are considered to be acceptable as with the previous application. This image on the bottom left shows the relationship with Hoxton Gardens. So the impact on this green space has been assessed, and the extent of overshadowing caused by the proposal is negligible. So overall, those impacts are considered to be acceptable. Just running through some of the before and after CGIs. This is a long view south down Hoxton Street, and this is a view with the proposal in place. Again, you can see how this recessed element breaks up the front elevation, and this kind of recessed condition is not unusual on Hoxton Street. It happens on a couple of occasions further up and down the street. This is a view looking north up Hoxton Street. And then with the proposed development in place, again, you can see how it raises on the corner of Purcell Street, but then drops down as it gets towards the context to the north. This is a view from the opposite side of the street on Stanway Street, and you can get a feel for the proposed architecture, the change in materiality, and the use of brick and recessed balconies. This is a view from Purcell Street, and with the proposed development in place, and you can see how it drops down, or steps down to meet the residential, to address the residential units to the west. This elevation is also where the development will be serviced from, so it'll be serviced from the street, which officers consider to be acceptable. On Saturdays, given the market operating on Saturdays, its condition is recommended that would restrict the use of HGVs on that day, but otherwise the transport impacts are considered to be acceptable, and overall the scheme is considered to be acceptable. The sustainability contributions and conditions have been updated to reflect current policy and are also considered to be acceptable. So overall the scheme is considered acceptable and is therefore recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
First, that's
Okay, so you 2.5 minutes each, is that?
it's about that, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Committee, my name is Chris Betteridge. I'm planning consultant on behalf of Iceland Foods. The subcommittee will be aware of the need for affordable housing in the borough. Policy LP15 requires residential build to rent developments to be made of 50% affordable housing. The application proposal only provides 36. Adams Integra, specialist viability consultants commissioned by Iceland, advise that the proposal can deliver more affordable housing whilst remaining viable. Adams Integra advised that the applicant's viability assessment contains assumptions which have not been robustly challenged by the council's assessor. Build costs are excessive, with a number having been agreed on a meet-in-the-middle basis without any supporting evidence. The design fees are excessive, with a flat fee of 10% applied, resulting in a cost in excess of £1 million. There is no specific evidence to support these design fees. Finally, a greater return could have been achieved if the proposed retail unit had been open to offers, including an offer from Iceland. A more robust assessment of the applicant's viability assessment would suggest that up to 3 more affordable dwellings could be delivered. Given the need for affordable housing, the council should be taking a more robust approach to reviewing viability assessments, requiring applicants to fully evidence any reduction in provision. The applicant has provided insufficient evidence to support its case for a reduction in the affordable housing requirements. Local Plan Policy LP37 states developments of retail units of 1,000 square metres must provide a small retail unit. No small shop is proposed and no justification is provided. LP37 is a recently adopted policy to be given full weight. If this proposal is not required to comply, it is difficult to envisage any scheme which would be required to comply with it. A contribution of £30,000 is proposed in lieu. However, LP37 does not provide for this. The officer's report suggests a contribution could be for the relocation and fit-out costs of a displaced business or general improvements. Other than my client, there is no displaced businesses, and in respect of general improvements, it's unclear how that would compensate for the non-provision of a small shop. The large number of small shops in Hoxton demonstrates the demand for such premises from small local businesses. The failure to provide one as part of the scheme, as required by policy, removes this local business opportunity. Members should be aware matters have progressed since a previous application, and a new local plan has been adopted with a raft of new evidence. All this legitimises the committee reaching a different conclusion to that it reached in 2019. It is requested the application is refused for the failure to comply with policy LP37 and LP15, the local plan.
Thank you.
Good evening, members of the committee. I'm Simon Anderson. I'm Property Director of Iceland Foods. We've maintained a continuous objection to the redevelopment of 209-223 Hoxton Street since the submission of the original application. Iceland's been a long-standing member of and investor in the Hoxton community, having traded from the street for some 25 years. For most, if not all, this period, we've been the one and only food supermarket in the local area, providing good quality, affordable food for local residents. And without our continued presence, the area would almost certainly have been without a food store. We've been clear about our wish to remain trading on Hoxton Street and to continue to serve the local community well into the future. The fact is that we've not been given the opportunity to bid for the new retail space that is proposed as part of this redevelopment. A deal appears to have been done off-market with the supermarket chain Lidl. Had we been given the opportunity, however, I have no doubt that our offer would have been significantly above Lidl's. The extra profit that this would have generated for the developer would in turn have allowed them to provide additional, much needed affordable housing units within this proposed development, something that has been independently verified by Adams Integra. Our floor space requirement would also have allowed the inclusion of a small shop unit next door in line with council policy.
That's 1 minute left.
Our store employs around 50 colleagues, the great majority of local residents. In summary, by allowing the current proposals to go ahead, we believe the council will be missing out on a golden opportunity to provide more much needed affordable housing for the local Hackney residents, something we know the council considers to be very important. And finally, Hoxton Street will lose a well-liked and trusted retailer who has served the community tirelessly for a quarter of a century. The strength of local feeling is clear. 2,300 Hoxton residents recently signed a petition calling for the application to be rejected. In the circumstances, it's respectfully requested that the committee have due regard to the weight of this local opposition and refuse this application.
Thank you very much. Steve, please. 5 minutes.
Do I use this?
No, you speak up. You've got a Google box over there, so you
Right.
can, whatever that, so you don't have to say, hey, Google, you just speak. Oh, God, this has stopped.
Nice touch. Chair and committee members, thank you very much for your time this evening. I'm here to speak on behalf of residents of Hoxton East and Shoreditch who oppose the loss of their only local and low-cost supermarket, which many of them rely on. While I'm speaking in objection, I recognise there are a few grounds on which the application can be refused, but I'm hopeful of setting out some of the areas that may be sought by the committee this evening. It would be remiss of me not to speak on behalf of residents who will be losing out from this application. My fellow councillors and I ran a campaign to raise the issue about this planning application when the application was first made, and we submitted our petition from local residents at the time of the consultation. The supermarket the local people and indeed the Hoxton Saturday market rely on will be gone for at least a year, possibly up to 2 years. In its place will be a new supermarket, some new flats, all of which are built to rent and some of which will be at London living rent. Doesn't seem like a great deal for local people. Therefore, I would encourage committee members to fully consider some of the following issues. Firstly, the viability assessment, especially as it relates to the affordable housing provision. Whether this is a good development for the people of Hoxton and Hackney, or whether the applicant can do better, as has been suggested. While London living rent was a welcome late addition to the initial application, the number of units does not meet the 50% target in the local plan. Hoxton has significant waiting lists for long-term affordable housing, and so an increase in the affordable element would be welcome, but encourage the committee to insist on the clawback mechanism, for example, should the viability assessment indeed proved to be inaccurate. Secondly, the impact on the local infrastructure. The supermarket, for some people, acts as something of an anchor institution for Hoxton Saturday market, which has in recent years gone from strength to strength. In addition, directly across the road is the Hoxton Community Garden, which will now be overlooked and overshadowed by new provision of housing. The £30,000 contribution in lieu of the smaller units should similarly be insisted upon by the committee, and local councils would welcome the opportunity to discuss how this should be spent for the benefit of local people. A full construction plan being the third point. Due to recent changes to the accessibility of some streets in the vicinity, linked to the construction of the Britannia Leisure Centre and the implementation of the Hoxton West LTN, Purcell Street now sees increased traffic through its street, an issue we've already raised with the officers. This construction has the potential to cause significant congestion, having an impact on the residents of that part of the Arden estate, and so the construction plan must take this in the Saturday market into consideration. Design being the fourth point. Hoxton Street is a designated conservation area, and so given the scale of this development, the design of the building should be, and must be, in my opinion, additive to the nature of the street and not detrimental. Why, for example, does the building reflect and reference the flat roof modern blocks to the south, rather than the sloped dormer roofs of the historic buildings to the north? It feels like this is following previous mistakes in terms of planning, in terms of changing the nature of the street. And finally, the loss of the supermarket. I realise that the loss of the supermarket for whatever length of time and whatever the impact on local residents is not grounds for refusal. However, I would encourage the committee to investigate whether the supermarket element of the development can be brought back into use as soon as possible before the completion of the building as a whole, if that is feasible, and also to interrogate the verbal update on the use class which was given during this session to ensure that the building does remain a space usable by a supermarket provider. That's everything from me this evening. Thank you very much, Chair and committee members, for hearing me.
Thank you very much. Yes, please. So, applicant, we're over to you now, please.
Thank you. Good evening, Chairman and members.
Sorry, 1 minute. Sorry, yes, you do have 10 minutes, by the way, because Steve has come in. We want to be fair. But it doesn't mean you have to use them.
Good evening, Chairman and members. My name is Tim Waters, and I'm speaking in support of this application and the officer recommendation. Some of you were here in November 2019 when the Council resolved to grant planning permission for this proposed development on officer recommendation. Planning permission was not granted at the time because of the threat of legal action from Iceland, who maintain that all of the financial viability information relating to the application and on the matter of affordable housing should have been publicly disclosed prior to that meeting. The application was due to be heard again by Planning Committee towards the end of last year, but circumstances sadly dictated the need to withdraw and resubmit the application. The principal objective to this application is still the existing retail tenant Iceland. Iceland is clearly wanting to protect its commercial interests. However, matters of commercial competition are not material planning considerations. Iceland has been aware of our potential redevelopment plans since 2014, when agreeing a redevelopment break clause in its lease agreement in return for reduced rent terms. Drawings were issued to its representatives in September 2018 at their request, and when the promised response failed to materialise, the applicant took the not unreasonable step in March 2019 to approach other discount food retailers to gauge interest, including the now proposed tenant Lidl. Again, there is a petition maintaining support for Iceland as a local community asset. However, it is unclear how the petition was generated and whether the respondents, who are presumed Iceland customers, were made aware of the fact that the new retail units would be occupied by Lidl. The main points taken by Iceland against the application relate to affordable housing and the loss of the small retail unit. On the matter of affordable housing, I would comment as follows. The proposed developments would deliver 36% affordable housing by unit, i.e. 9 of the 25 proposed units. This is the maximum reasonable amount according to the accepted financial viability assessment. This would be affordable housing for rent in the form of London Living rent units, which is the preferred GLA rental model, and has been agreed with the council's housing team. The rents would be set to current Hoxton ward levels. Our viability assessment has been independently reviewed and verified on behalf of the council by Montague Evans. Iceland has disputed the cost plan and the professional fees allowance. However, the cost plan has been accepted as being robust on this independent assessment and not meriting a further update. Although construction costs have risen post-COVID based on the BCIS index of construction costs, this has been negated by current market conditions. The professionals' fee allowance also aligns with what has been accepted elsewhere in the borough recently. In any event, early and late stage review mechanisms would be built into the legal agreement to provide for the appropriate reassessment of development viability and potentially increased affordable housing delivery should it become viable to do so. In terms of the small retail unit, I would comment as follows. The pharmacy occupying the small shop unit is already relocated into a vacant shop unit at 193 Hoxton Street, some 50 metres due south of its former premises. Hence, the pharmacy will continue to serve the local community. The policy states that a small shop unit should be incorporated in new retail development of over 1,000 square metres gross. Proposed development is adding less than 200 metres squared to the existing retail floor space. Furthermore, there would be no net loss of retail floor space. The Council's Planning Obligations SPD acknowledges that incorporating small shop units will only be enforced where it is feasible to do so. There are already a large number of small independent shops in the local shopping centre. The provision of a larger, mid-sized supermarket on the site designed to Lidl's operating requirements would benefit the diversity and overall vitality and viability of the shopping centre as a whole. The Section 106 agreement provides for a local shopping centre contribution that the Council's Economic Development team believes is still necessary to mitigate the loss of the small shop unit. The financial contribution would be SIL compliant and allocated towards the relocation and fit-out costs of displaced businesses in the local shopping centre and/or general improvements in the immediate area to support other local retailers. Overall, the application proposal would successfully optimise the development potential of this underutilised and highly sustainable site. The provision of the PRS units would contribute positively towards London-wide and local housing need, promoting opportunity and choice in the wider housing market. The substantially improved specification of the retail unit would help enliven the street scene and reinforce the overall retail function of the local shopping centre, with anticipated spin-off benefits to local retailers. As such, we would respectfully request that members, as they did previously, resolve to grant planning permission in accordance with the officer recommendation.
Thank you. Okay, it's over to us now, members. Barry, could you first tell us about that E-class, the change in the condition that you were talking about? We're not used to E-class yet.
Yeah, so use class E captures a number of town centre uses. It's a change from the previous use class designations for retail and other town centre uses. So retail falls within use class E part A. So the existing condition, which is condition 30, restricts the use to within part A of use class E. We'd like to add a further sentence to that condition, which prevents permitted development changes of use. Currently, permitted development allows changes of use away from use class E to residential, for example. So that's the change we'd like to see to condition 30.
Okay, thank you. I understand that. Okay, members, questions, please. Councillor Hanson.
Thanks very much, Chair. I mean, I guess, were we to grant this, it's inevitable that the supermarket would close while it was being built. But my understanding is that that wouldn't be grounds on which we could turn something down. But I wasn't completely clear what the impact was likely to be on the market, the street market, during construction. I think that ties to Councillor Race's point about a construction plan. So perhaps we could look at those two things together. I've got some others, Chair, but should we do that one first?
Yes, let's do that first. Have we thought about the street market and the impact of construction in the construction plan?
Yeah, we have, and there's a condition requiring further details. So it's been part of the assessment of the draft plan, and perhaps Cass might have something to say about how we'll coordinate that with the other issues that Councillor Rice described about vehicles, changes to transport context, given the development of Britannia.
Okay, please, Kazim.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Barry. So I think just a point about construction management plan. Yeah, we'd work with other colleagues in the council to try and ensure that the market is not unnecessarily closed for any duration of time. But that's, we need to see the details of the construction plan, and we'll obviously look at the construction management side of things for that. I think Councillor Race was raising a point about the use of Purcell Street. I think one of the conditions is a delivery and servicing plan, and again, we would look to kind of look at further details as to how the vehicles kind of service the site. One of the key points is, and again, protecting the Saturday market. We are not, we're asking for a condition to not allow LGVs to be used. I think that's quite positive, and that again goes towards protecting the market. And then apart from that, it's an existing controlled parking zone. We'll be looking at exemption for all new residential units as well as the commercial. So nobody on site would be able to apply for a CPZ permit apart from blue badge holders, and we're recommending 2 blue badge spaces there. Yeah, just let me know if I haven't covered something that you expect me to cover.
Steve was suggesting that more traffic is going down Purcell Street, and I guess that's not good for a market if it becomes a through route. You've considered what you might do for that, or you will consider that?
Yeah, so currently on a Saturday, there is no through route from Purcell Street to Hoxton Street, and that would continue. And we've looked at the trip generation impacts for this development, and they are pretty reasonable. There is a very slight increase, more likely to be due to servicing of the residential units, and the rest remains fairly similar to the current situation.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hanson, you had some more.
Yes, I did, Chair. Thank you. I mean, I think just for the record, Lidl versus Iceland is not a matter for this committee. Just for anyone who's listening, we can't take a view on which we think is preferable. and they are clearly the same use class as each other. On the conservation issues, could the officers tell us about the roof design and why they are, why we've gone for the roof design we have?
Matt?
Yeah, hi. So in terms of the roof form, there's a variety of roof forms down the street. The older buildings tend to have the mansard roofs, more traditional sort of roof form. And then the more recent developments, including the ones from the 70s, have this flat roofed form. So there's a variety there within the same conservation area. And I think if you're going for a contemporary approach as you are here, the flat roofed form, is a more appropriate form for the building. And it's quite typical to see that with contemporary developments within conservation areas. So I think it's about getting that distinction between old and new. And so our assessment has been about, whether the massing is contextual and fits in, which we think it does. It's in traditional materials, it's brick facings. The elevations have been divided up so it kind of respects the plot width, narrower plot widths along the street. But yeah, so in terms of the roof form, we don't think there's a big issue between it being flat roofed or having mansard roofs. And if you start putting mansard roofs on contemporary buildings, it can start looking very pastiche, and you lose that distinction between the old and the new.
Any more?
Yes, just one more. Councillor Rice asked, as I said, we can't favour Lidl over Iceland or vice versa, but we can say that having a supermarket is beneficial to the people in the area. So is there anything we as a committee would be able to do to try and say that the period of time during which the supermarket is closed should be as short as possible? I've seen planning conditions that say things like, you can't do this until you've done that. So is there any way we can say, I don't know, you can't let out the flats until you've opened the supermarket or something like that?
I don't know whether Barry wants to come in to see whether there's any, or the applicant, what the plan is in terms of phasing. It's quite a small development, so...
Barry, any ideas?
We do have the power to control certain things through, triggers such as occupation of the residential units. I don't know if it would be necessarily appropriate in this case, given the scale of the development. I think it is probably worth asking the applicant what their plans are in terms of phasing, because it could well be that they're quite lined up anyway.
So the suggestion is that we try and encourage the supermarket to open by saying, right, you can't sell those flats until the supermarket is functional. Could we do that?
Well, I think we should at least explore it, Chair.
Well, that's what I'm asking, Barry.
I don't see any reason why we couldn't necessarily.
Okay. Applicant.
I would imagine that we could agree to that. I think that if I can put it in these terms, the devil will be in the detail of the construction management plan, which would need to be secured, as you know, under condition. And that construction management plan, we would want to work with the market and local residents in terms of trying to minimise the disturbance and the time it takes to actually build out the development, and there'll be full and proper consultation as part of that process. But obviously we start from the bottom up. So the supermarket, one would imagine, would be fitted out and ready.
That sounds like a yes to me, Barry.
Would this be part of the construction management plan or a separate?
No. It'd be a condition that
condition for
letting the flats, the supermarket was functional, because we don't want the flats sold off and the supermarket hanging around for the next 2 years, do we?
Indeed.
Is that reasonable?
If we can do it, I propose we do, Chair. It's reasonable to me.
If the applicant agrees to it, I think we can ask for it.
It's difficult without the clients sitting.
Well, you had a chance to bring them along.
I certainly did. He's unfortunately not able to make it. But I think from what I'm hearing and my familiarity with other mixed-use developments, retail and...
Okay, that sounds a good idea to me then. Okay, we'll put some best endeavours into it or something like that.
If we ask the officers to do what they can.
Okay, should we decide to accept it, we will try and work that into the conditions. Any more questions, Brian?
Obviously, we've heard two accounts of how the viability assessment might go. We've had Iceland contesting the applicant's one. So could officers explain to me exactly how the review mechanism and the clawback mechanism works in case like this, and how we know data we're getting is accurate?
Barry, for you.
I don't know if I caught all of that, to be honest. Was it about the review mechanism for the viability assessment, yeah?
Yeah,
Yeah.
how they would work and how we know the data we're getting is accurate.
Yeah, so as with most applications of this nature, and in line with the relevant guidance and policy, there is both an early and late stage review mechanism. So this gives us an opportunity to review the actual build costs after a portion of the building has been constructed and after a portion of the building has been occupied. So it gives you it kind of sense tests the values that went into the viability assessment. So that's in place here. You also mentioned clawback. So because this is a PRS scheme, there is a clause recommended which, if the covenant of 15 years is broken, so if any of the private rented sector units are sold on the open market, then a clawback mechanism kicks in, which seeks to get some of the money that will be lost. The money that would have been gone towards affordable housing to be clawed back and used towards offsite contribution towards affordable housing. So we have both of those mechanisms in place.
So it disincentivizes selling off the.
Effectively, that's the purpose of it, yeah.
Does that answer?
So do we have an independent source of information, or are you reliant entirely upon what the applicant submits?
Yeah, the process is similar to with an application. So the information is submitted at the trigger point within the clause, and then it's looked at by an independent assessor. So it's a very similar process to what happens at the application stage.
Do we have a property services person looking at
Yeah. Harry
Yeah.
is here if he wants to chip in.
Harry, tell us how it happened.
So with the early stage review, as Barry said, it's the same process. It's just reviewed at the time it's triggered. And with the late stage review, it will take into account actual achieved values and build costs. So the applicant will be required to provide evidence behind the actual build costs that have been achieved and the actual sales values or rental values. So, yeah, the actual what's been achieved is taken into account.
Thank you. Okay. AJ, question?
There's two questions. One was what Steve raised, which is the contribution of 30,000 towards relocation and fit out costs, how we can make that transparent. I think he went the councillors involved.
He did. I'm not sure that'll happen. Can you tell us how this 30,000 will?
But will it vanish into thin air?
Barry, where will it go? And who will get to choose how it's spent?
Application.
Our economic regen team they'd oversee the allocation of it. It was arrived at through consultation with them. That's how the figure was arrived at, and that's how the means that it will be spent. So in a similar way to contributions that relate to 10 centres or other commercial uses.
Okay, can we put an informative on the thing to say that we'd like to see the local members consulted? But that's just a note that we can add to chivvy somebody up to talk to the local councillors. Whether they will or not, who knows?
Yeah, we could rephrase the clause to be to require the submission of a document perhaps, and then we could consult with members on that. That might be the best way.
Does that work?
Otherwise, they'd be getting involved in the sort of the bidding for contributions, which might be a bit complicated.
Okay, thank you.
Just one more question, but I'm not sure if it's relevant. The objector said that Iceland weren't allowed to bid for that.
Not material.
Yeah, let's get into that. Let's get into that then.
Like to respond to that, what the objector said about
I'll ask that question. So Barry, Iceland are suggesting that if they were the people to be involved in this scheme, then more money would be generated for affordable housing. I guess the first question is that relevant? And have you worked through those issues if they are a material planning issue?
I think the first thing is in terms of claims about, one occupier providing more rent than another, as you mentioned before, when it comes to commercial matters, that's not really a material planning consideration in this case. I think when it comes to our assessment, we have to assess the application that's put in front of us. So that involves a proposed occupier with rental levels, and heads of terms have been provided to substantiate the commercial revenue that went into the viability assessment. That's been tested by our viability assessor. So the process by which we've arrived at this viability outcome has been robust, we think, and in line with relevant guidance. Harry might want to expand on that a little bit, but I think in terms of would we have a better deal if Iceland were the occupier, based on the information that's been submitted with the application, we're satisfied we have the maximum reasonable amount. So I think that's our position.
Harry, do you have any? You've been involved in this.
Yeah, just to add, in terms of the rental value, it's been assessed against the market. So we assess the viability on a market basis, which is what we consider best value. So we've considered other lettings of supermarkets, and we consider that the little offer is highest value. Now, if Iceland were able to offer more, that's not the only element to the value of the supermarket. It's about the investment value. So as set out in the viability review, it's about the tenants, the length of the lease, the covenant strength of the tenant. There's various things that go into that beyond the rental value. So it's been thoroughly reviewed, and it's considered to be robust and a market approach.
Thank you. Okay, I've got a few questions. The one is about this small. This is to Barry, I guess. The small unit. I can understand. I know Hoxton Street, and I know there are lots of small units, and so one here or there wouldn't make much difference, I don't think, looking at it. But there was a suggestion that where would it make a difference? We've got a policy that tries to encourage this. Wouldn't it fail in every case where the developer says, "Well, I don't really want to do that," and there's lots of other little shops around? So what's the purpose of that policy?
Yeah, I think the purpose of the policy recognizes that there's a need for affordable units, small affordable units. I think the way that small and independent shops are defined, I think it's with the idea that they would be more affordable to small retailers and small businesses. So that's why the policy is there. I think, as with any application, we need to assess it on its own merits, and in this case, the particular local context. And I think key is the reprovision of a large retailer, which, as mentioned in the report, is considered beneficial to the vibrancy of the town centre. I think they make the characteristics of this particular site, exceptional to some degree. I think, generally speaking, the policy wouldn't lose any heft by this. I think there's a number of other schemes where it would be, if there's a new retail use provided over 1,000 square meters, it would be a lot more straightforward in terms of requiring a small unit. In this case, as well as mentioned by the applicant, the existing use is already in excess of 1,000 square meters, so it's not really creating additional retail floor space. So it's also kind of mitigated to a certain extent by that. So yeah, I don't think it creates a precedent that would diminish the power of the policy.
The second question is, there was a series, and this is, I guess, Harry's, a series of issues about that were challenged about the viability. One was the design. I think the design or the costs were too expensive. There was a few things, actually. I wonder, Harry, you've taken all of those. There was no new issues brought up this evening for you that you haven't considered?
Yeah, I think it's all been covered in the review. In terms of start with the build costs, they've been reviewed by an independent cost consultant who has a significant amount of experience in Hackney in particular, and consider them to be reasonable. And it's come to an agreement with the applicant's cost consultant. And then the second point is the professional fees or design fees, which again, from my professional experience and having spoken to the cost consultant about this, we consider the agreed amount to be reasonable. Now, as with all viability assessments, it's an estimate until the scheme's built out, but that's why we have the late stage review and the early stage review mechanisms in place. But yeah, they've been robustly tested.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions for anybody? No, we know what we're about. So the recommendation summary is to approve conditional planning permission subject to conditions, and there was that one extra condition that we're going to work out somehow that we all understand.
Yeah.
The pre-commencement trigger or whatever we call it to try and encourage the supermarket to get up and running as soon as possible. So should we approve that? That'll be included. So it's to approve conditional planning permission subject to conditions and legal agreement. Members, all those in favour, please show. That is all of us. Thank you very much indeed. Okay. So it's 1924. I think we should plod on, shouldn't we? Hello, officers, can you hear me?
Yes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So we're set up here now. So I forgot the minutes of the last time. So let's quickly try and do those if we can. So the minutes of the 3rd of March, Katie, you were presided.
I read them and they seemed fine to you.
Okay, so there I can actually physically sign them. They haven't become available. Okay, so we're approving them. Virtually signing them still. And the 7th of April, I presided over that, and I'm happy to approve those. Any issues for members? No? Okay, so Technico House, that's Steve Fraser-Lim. If you could present for us, please, Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I'll just bring up the presentation.
You're a bit quiet, Steve. Can someone turn you up?
Can you hear me a bit better like that?
That's better, thank you.
Yep. Okay, I'm just bringing up the presentation now. Right. Can everybody see that okay? Okay. Just okay. Yeah. So application sites Technico House. It's a sort of forms its own block surrounded by Christopher Street, Wilson Street, Earl Street, and Clifton Street, and part of Crown Place. This is the building here, or one of the sort of two buildings that form the single site Technico House. This is a view looking down Clifton Street with the application site on the right, and a view sort of a bit further back up Clifton Street. So you can see some Technico House here, 1 Crown Place in the background here, 30 Crown Place, which is an office building here, and further views of the application site. So this is the southwest corner where you've got this sort of retained facade here, part of the which is retained as part of the existing building. And looking down Earl Street, site notices were placed around the site, and then some sort of views from a little bit further away. So this is looking up Wilson Street. So the application site is here, just past the 1 Crown Place developments. A view looking eastwards from Finsbury Square, which is in London Borough of Islington. So you've got sort of the existing kind of office buildings that front the square here, and you can just see the building in glimpses there. From Finsbury Square again, the south side. This is 1 Crown Place development, and then this is from the north, from Worship Square, sort of the end of Clifton Street, looking south, and the site is sort of just down there. And from looking down Sun Street, and some views from level 8 within 1 Crown Place to the south. So the application site roofs are just sort of down here. You can see some other sort of views around. That's 30 Crown Place there, and then sort of looking north, this is the application site with then Christopher Street just tucked in down there. You can't really see. The application proposals have been developed with bearing in mind a number of sort of constraints and designations, heritage assets and things. So site itself's not actually in a conservation area, but it is bounded by Sun Street Conservation Area to the south. Shoreditch Conservation Area is not that far away to the north, and on the west is the Bunhill Fields and Finsbury Square Conservation Area, on the opposite side of Wilson Street in London Borough of Islington. There's a number of listed buildings which are around and about. So for instance, number 3, 15 to 23 Christopher Street is grade 2 listed. So that's just on the opposite side of the Christopher Street to the north. The Flying Horse Public House is also listed on the corner of Sun Street, Wilson Street, and so other sort of heritage assets around and about. The area is also within the central activity zone, within the an opportunity area in the London plan. There's been a number of other developments, large-scale developments that have taken place around and about, either in neighbouring area, which is City of London, or in Hackney itself. So, for instance, number 1 is 2 to 3 Finsbury Avenue. Large-scale development's been approved. It's referenced in the committee report. Number 2 is 1 Crown Place. Number 3 within Hackney is, I think, 14 to 15 Appold Street, a 45-storey building, and various other sort of large developments, for instance, Principal Place and the Stage, not that far away. And then in the City of London, for instance, you've got nearby other developments as part of the sort of Broadgate Quarter here, for instance, building number 8, which is relatively close to the site. Members may remember that the application from the pre-application committee briefing, so there was a briefing in June 2019, when the proposals were for a sort of series of tower elements, and then as the sort of proposals changed due to discussions around the sort of site designations, conservation areas, listed buildings, views, and things, the sort of massing reduced, or the overall height reduced, but the massing was still a concern, you may recall, from the November 29 committee briefing. And so the proposals, so we sort of move on to our current proposals, which have responded to the pre-application discussions and the sort of issues raised and the design review panel comments. So on the ground floor, we've got the main office entrances from Clifton Street and also from Wilson Street, retail on the sort of corner to provide active frontages and interest at the sort of street level. A loading bay area to service a development from Earl Street. There's an entrance here to access the basement cycle parking, and then also there's an affordable workspace facing onto Christopher Street, or on the north side here. At the basement level, you still sort of substantial amount of affordable workspace here. Also cycle parking, other cycle parking facilities, sort of cycle hub facility for repairing, maintaining bikes and things like that. And then at basement 2, there's also other sort of ancillary facilities for staff, showers and lockers and things. There are a couple of other basements, but that's containing plants, a couple of basement floors below that. Moving upwards, you've got the upper floors. At the lower levels are sort of a large office floor plate with a central cores, but then you can see how the massing has sort of cut back to kind of mitigate the visual impacts of the development in various sort of street scene views. So this is the sort of setback above that retained facade at the corner there. And then as you move upwards, there's further setbacks to the north, to the west, then a sort of wedge cut away from this southeast corner, and then further sort of cuts back to the facade to reduce the massing. As you move up the building, that's up to level 10, level 15. Again, you're now the sort of tallest element here, and it's also sort of cut at an angle to reduce the kind of impact on 1 Crown Place to the south there. And then plant and servicing, building maintenance facilities, equipment at the top. Here the building facades, and you can see the kind of articulation of the massing and the cutaway elements here. This is the north elevation of Clifton Street. So there's a sort of the base of the building, and then a sort of middle section which is set back a bit to reduce the sort of apparent massing of the building, and then the sort of taller elements at the top. And you can see Clifton Street elevation. There's a sort of wedge there cut into the side of the building. Earl Street and Wilson Street. The architecture, you can see that you've got those 3 elements. You've got at the sort of the base of the building, predominantly brick, some terracotta, green terracotta window reveals, some parapets are ceramic parapets, green, and at the sort of mid-level, and then at the top is sort of lighter with more concrete frame, and also significant amounts of glazing where you get that sort of wedge slice through the building. And then you can see now the base where the building relates to the ground floor and the surrounding streets, with those sort of retail units on corners, corner of Earl Street, Clifton Street, Christopher Street and Clifton Street, so sort of looking down from the north a bit, and then the corner of Wilson Street and Christopher Street. So this is one of the office entrances there into that space. The corner of Wilson Street and Earl Street. So the proposals do retain this facade that's existing on the site at the moment. I should add on this slide actually we're not happy with the proposed shop front that's to be installed, that's shown on this plan for the retail unit on that corner. So there's a planning condition to require a more sort of traditionally designed shop front, which the applicants are happy to sort of redesign. So we'll deal with that at the condition stage. And then you can see the sort of upper parts of the building as it sort of cuts and slices back to reduce the visual impacts from the different views. And again, you can see the sort of glass slice through here, the sort of light elements contrast with the more solid base further below. Just a bit on affordable workspace. This is the ground floor. It's got a direct access onto Christopher Street to the north there. And this sort of shows that facade. So there'll be ability for occupiers to have sort of window displays, shop fronts, and also ease of servicing and bringing things in and out. The affordable workspaces on ground floor, and then there's also a sort of mezzanine level above ground, and then two lower ground floors. There was a concern raised during the application stage about the sort of light to the lower ground spaces, but we feel that's been addressed with some light wells introduced within the building, and also pavement lights and a sort of staircase feature to bring light down into the lower levels. The proposals also include significant amounts of, sort of public realm enhancements. You can so the main area to be enhanced is along Clifton Street here. Also the new sort of footways around the site, and resurfacing Christopher Street. I'll talk about that a little bit further when I highlight the addendum report, because there's been some developments on that. It's a bit more detail of the sort of thing. This is, I would highlight this. It's at the moment, because the detailed design is yet to be sort of fully worked out, but it will involve new surfacing and pave and street furniture, plant landscaping, and with the ability to accommodate the idea is that it would be a space that can accommodate market stalls and things like that, so some flexible things during the day. The cutout sections to the building provide these landscape terrace areas, which will be an amenity for the office occupiers. So you can see some of the images from the design and access statement to show how these could work and be used by the businesses which would occupy the building. And they are really quite substantial in size, and the proposals are for quite extensive soft landscaping areas for outdoor sort of meetings and other activities, soft land with quite sort of substantial build up for planting, and including trees as well. So you can see that there are sort of quite significant sort of tree planting proposals throughout the roof spaces of the building, and also biodiversity enhancements in terms of bird and bat boxes. So the proposals will be quite sort of beneficial in terms of urban greening and improving the urban green factor of the site. Just moving on to some of the views which show the development in some of these longer distance views from Finsbury Square, for instance. That was previous was existing. This is proposed. So this is the development here next to One Crown Place. These black lines indicate the other buildings which have been consented but not built yet. And you can see how this sort of scale of the development steps down from One Crown Place towards the sort of lower rise Shoreditch townscape to the north. And then another view from Finsbury Square, from Wilson Street looking north. Building is, bigger than the existing building, so there are quite some substantial changes in some of these townscape views. This is from Clifton, from Crown Place. However, this needs to be borne in mind alongside the sort of the context of the site and the other sort of developments which have happened nearby, which intensify, increased sort of intensity of use of these sites in this kind of accessible location, city fringe area next to the City of London. This is from Earl Street, and this is from Clifton, for Christopher Street. So you can see the Christopher Street terrace here, adjacent to the existing building. This is one of the sort of critical views alongside the Finsbury Square view, because you've got these buildings are sort of Grade 2 listed. So the setting of those has been an important factor in the design development. So you can see that the different stepping back of the massing reduces the kind of visual impact of the upper parts of the building in some of these views from the north. And for looking down Wilson Street and Christopher Street again from looking eastwards, so you can see how the sort of setbacks reduce. They have they're less successful, I suppose, looking in this view, but in the other view you can see how it kind of reduces the apparent mass of the upper parts. The site is within the strategic view, couple of strategic views in the London View Management Framework. It's in the background of views from Westminster Pier and Gabriel's Wharf, but these images show that it won't be visible in those views, so it's not going to impact on the LVMF protected views. You'll see in the report, and also in terms of the sort of comments and objections, it's adjacent to One Crown Place, which is a development nearing completion to the south, and there's concerns raised around impact on daylight. So worth just sort of running through how that we've looked at this issue. I mean, One Crown Place is a mixed-use development, so you've got office on the lower levels. This is the blue, with the residential really sort of starting from that kind of the shared amenity spaces on floor 7, and then residential above. So this northern tower, 29 stories, and or 31 stories. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure the exact number, but it's slightly smaller than the southern tower. And you can see, so this is the view from One Crown Place. So this is the facade that will be immediately adjacent to the application site. And you can see we've looked at the sort of layouts, the flat layouts of that development, as well as visiting the site itself, as you can see from some of the photos. And then on level 7, there's this sort of shared amenity area for occupiers, and also an external amenity space, which has been assessed for overshadowing impacts. You've got, so the main sort of areas that are affected is this north tower. You've got these sort of corner units, which have a bit more of a dual aspect, so the impact is slightly less on these units, but there are some single aspect north facing units in that sort of gap there, which will be the most affected, particularly at the lower levels of, for instance, level 8 here, and then as you sort of rise up through the building, levels 9, 10, then moving up level 23 and up to level 25, and beyond that the daylight sunlight assessment doesn't really consider impacts because they'll be higher than the proposed building. I would also, I think that sort of just a couple more slides. In terms of daylight sunlight assessment, you can see there's quite sort of some discussion of that in the committee report, and I'm sure you'll hear further from speakers as well. This just shows the assessment with the existing building. This is One Crown Place to the south. That's the application proposal, so that the impact of that building on daylight on that northern tower of 1 Crown Place has been assessed. And you'll also see referenced in the committee report the sort of a mirror image assessment. So if the application site were developed to the sort of same massing as 1 Crown Place, what would the sort of daylight impacts be then as part of that? And that's sort of discussed further in the committee report. I would also just draw members' attention to the addendum reports. So there's a couple of sort of corrections in the reports, and also some updates in terms of the sort of public realm. So we've now got the estimate kind of agreed between the applicant and the council for the public realm works, and that's sort of set out in the report there. And that also includes, as well as that area on Clifton Street, which will be enhanced, there's also improvements to the corner of Christopher Street and Wilson Street, where there'll be a sort of a raised table similar to what you see sort of at the back of Principal Place. That's a similar sort of idea to that as well. There's also been some discussions on affordable workspace, and we've agreed, well, the applicant proposal is for a sort of 8% of floor space, which is a bit less than the policy, but with a higher level of discount for that space, which we consider to be a good offer in terms of affordable workspace, as we've set out in the addendum report. I think everything else is as per the committee report. Thank you, Chair.
So we're going over to Chris John now. As objector, please. You have 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, good evening, Chairman and members of the committee, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to address the committee today. My name is Chris John, and I'm the development manager in charge of delivering the 1 Crown Place development to the immediate south of the application site. Practical completion has recently been achieved on the 7th of May, and residents will be moving into the development in the next couple of weeks. 1 Crown Place is a residential-led mixed-use development comprising almost 250 units, with the northern residential tower directly opposite being the tallest part of the application proposal. I'm speaking today on behalf of the freeholder, AMTD, as well as on behalf of the future residents of the development. Our primary concern is related to the daylight and amenity impacts on the 1 Crown Place residents as a result of this proposal. At the outset, we wish to make it clear that we are not against a building of scale coming forward on the adjoining site in this location, and recognise it as a site within the City Fringe Opportunity Area and Central Activity Zone. However, we do have very real concerns about the amenity impacts on the 1 Crown Place residents in the North Tower, primarily due to the bulk and scale of the proposed development being pushed to the southeastern part of the application site. It is very unfortunate that the applicant has chosen to maximise the scale of development in this precise location. The sheer scale of development at the closest point only serves to exacerbate impacts such as outlook, privacy, as well as daylight, which I'll cover in more detail shortly. Maximising the scale of development directly opposite the residents of 1 Crown Place has led to incredibly significant daylight impacts on the residents. And we want to make clear how severe these impacts are to the committee before the decision on the application is made. The policy guidance with regards to assessing daylight impacts is to establish whether or not the proposed development would cause unacceptable harm, with Hackney's local plan policy, LP2, seeking to ensure there are no significant adverse impacts on the amenity of occupiers and neighbours. Our concern with the applicant's daylight assessment is that the real-life impacts from the existing baseline situation to propose are not clearly identified within their report, and instead the applicant is almost entirely reliant on the mirror massing and ADF assessments approach to justify impacts that should not be accepted by the committee. Instead, our daylight consultants, GIA, have outlined that in their experience from a wide amount of contextual analysis, appeal decisions and local authority decisions, the most appropriate way to determine acceptable impacts is through retained VSC levels. Retained VSC values that are in the low teens and ideally mid-teens in the majority is what is expected in dense urban locations such as this, and retained VSC values below 10% are considered to deliver poor daylight. And unless the existing values are already low, which is not the case here, such low retained values to principal windows should be kept to a minimum, not the majority. The applicant's daylight assessment outlines the impacts on VSC from existing are very significant. 56% of all rooms will see a noticeable change in VSC. Over 60 will see more than an 80% loss. A further 87 will see between 60 to 80% loss, and a further 82 will experience between 40 to 60% loss. It is our daylight consultants' view that losses in excess of 60% constitute unacceptable harm, meaning 147 windows would experience unacceptable harm. In fact, there are examples in One Crown Place where existing daylight VSC levels of over 30% have a fall in VSC to around 2%, impacts in excess of 90%. It is difficult to consider a situation where these impacts could be deemed anything other than unacceptable. If impacts in excess of 90%, leaving almost no retained VSC, are not considered to be unacceptable, then one could question as to whether any level of impact in dense urban locations such as this could be described as unacceptable. And therefore, it even brings into question the need for assessing daylight and sunlight at all. What is clear, though, is that such low levels of retained VSC would result in an incredibly poor environment for the future residents, which is well below the typically accepted levels in dense urban locations such as this. As outlined above, appeal decisions in the GLA typically state that retained VSC figures below 10% would give a very poor environment, and the applicant here is reducing retained values to as little as 2%. To summarise, we do not object to the methodologies being undertaken by the applicant, but rather that the incredibly significant impacts are being justified solely using the mirror massing approach to daylight. The real life impacts that will be experienced by residents will be huge, resulting in very low retained VSC values. That should not be supported by the committee. Unfortunately, the One Crown Place team has not had any correspondence with the applicant or their advisors at all during the process, and we would welcome the opportunity to discuss this proposal further and look for ways in which the scheme could be amended to at least reduce some of these impacts and improve the living environment for future residents, while still delivering a significant level of development on the site.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Poole, please.
Good evening. So we've got a team here principally to answer any questions that the committee may have, but I think just heard a few things that warrant a response. I think in the first instance, we reached out at the pre-application stage with the owners of One Crown Place through our consultation organisation, and the offer was not responded to with regard to the offer to meet, to discuss. We don't know why that happened, but the offer was made. If there was a breakdown in communication, I don't know where that existed, but in our statements of community involvement, as part of the application, that was specifically referenced. With regards to daylighting and sunlighting, clearly there's a difference here in professional opinion. You have your views and your advice, and we've had our views and advice from Aidan Cosgrave, who's here to answer any questions that members may specifically have on this point, but also your officers have assessed it and aligned their judgments with our own, and so for the purposes of this evening we'll leave that there unless you've got any specific questions on that particular point for Aidan. And finally, what I would say is there was a point made about the southeast corner being an area where that we've massed up in most depth. Actually, that's the area where we have introduced cutback, and the whole modelling and massing of the proposal, as your officers will be aware, was to a large degree a function of making sure that we have what we regard as a comfortable relationship with our neighbours. And so that is why that cutback in that particular place exists. So we are here to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. So, members, I've got a few, but if you'd like to start, anybody? Shall I kick off? Okay, I'll kick off. I guess let's get to the bottom of this mirror business first. I mean, essentially, to the objector, your developer built a very high building right on the edge of your site, where one would expect another building to pop up at some time in the future. To ask the question, to be a bit provocative, did they not? How many floors did they think was going to be built just over the road from them?
look, I'm not sure on how many floors they were expecting to be built, but I think they would expect the proposals coming forward to be more considerate in terms of retained BSC levels, which we don't think has happened.
Because our officers are saying actually it's in terms of the height, it's shorter than your building, and so is less impactful than it could have been under the mirror. I accept what you've said, but you don't accept the mirror sort of suggestion, and I'm going to talk to officers about that. But that's clearly an issue that we've tackled before in these dense urban locations.
Yeah, I think that as well, you've got face-to-face with, I think, a 10-metre gap, which is quite, I believe, quite rare as far as two tower teams coming forward as well. So I think, although the mirror massing is one thing, other things that should be considered are not being presented clearly, I think.
Okay, so Steve, can you tell us about why you think that, at least in part, the mirror massing thing is appropriate? Because it's been suggested that it's not. And if you could bring up your drawing or your model on that mirror mass, perhaps I know AJ probably doesn't know what we're talking about. You could explain it a bit more to him and to us. So that's it, yes.
The public who may be watching.
And to the public. Here we are.
You can mute.
Hello, Steve, are you on mute?
Sorry, yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely there are a fair number of issues to consider when we're looking at the daylight sunlight impacts. I mean, the first thing we'd say is there definitely are impacts, and quite significant ones, on the adjoining property, but the guidance is that we need to also factor in the sort of site-specific circumstances and the surrounding context when we're assessing what's a kind of an acceptable level of impact. So when you look at the site, it's in the central activity zone. It's within an opportunity area. It's very high P-tile. It's next to the sort of City of London area. So the planning policies are looking for a sort of intensification of development on the site. The existing building is, sort of relatively low rise in comparison to some of the other developments that have taken place further to the south and to the east. And so our view is that there is an expectation that a larger building will happen on this site than is currently there at the moment. I suppose the applicants have raised concern about the reliance on a sort of a mirror image massing. They say that is more appropriate for if you've got a sort of a cleared site next door, where you're going from nothing there currently to a sort of a large building, which would result in some very significant impacts. But nonetheless, we feel that there are some similarities to that situation here, because you've got a relatively low-rise building with the expectation that it will be developed to a bigger building. So you can see, as part of the assessment, the BRE guidelines talk about that if a development is built, for instance, One Crown Place, very close to the boundary, then you can the phrase used from the BRE guidance is that it's taking more than its fair share of light, and it's in some respects could be considered a bad neighbour, and therefore there's the expectation that somebody else will come along and develop the site next door in a similar way, and that one way to assess what would be a reasonable kind of level of impact is through this sort of mirror image massing, which has been undertaken and does show that the application proposals would have less daylight impact than the mirror image version. I mean, the mirror image is as the objectives have highlighted, it's one part of the assessment. There are other things to take into account. I think, for instance, in the committee report, you'll see sort of reference to average daylight factor, which is another way of assessing the daylight, taking into account the whole room rather than just the window. That technique's generally more appropriate to assess daylight within new developments, but it can be used in these sort of situations where you've got a development sort of under construction. So that's also part of the assessment that we've taken into account, as well as some of the other sort of references to other daylight impacts from other developments around and about. For instance, you've got 2 to 3 Finsbury Square, which is on the other side of One Crown Place, so that's sort of having impacts on the South Tower. That 2 to 3 Finsbury Square has a resolution to grant planning permission from the City of London. So these are all the factors we've weighed in and taken into account, and we consider that yes, that unfortunately there are some significant impacts, but that's not an unusual situation in Shoreditch. You do see developments with big daylight impacts, and given the context of the site and these other factors and all the information within the daylight assessment, that what's the impacts that we're seeing are kind of reasonable in this case.
Okay, 2 further questions. The objector talked about appeals decisions, and he inferred that appeals decision led his daylight people to think that you're not in the same sort of area really as those. Have you considered that?
Yeah, I mean, a number of different appeals have been referenced within the applicant's daylight sunlight assessment, and also the objection letter from the One Crown Place team. So we are sort of mindful of that, but I think every site is kind of different. I think what we're also mindful of is other applications which we've considered in Shoreditch. The situations are never the same, but Shoreditch, the part of the character of the area is narrow streets, buildings that right on the back edge of the footway, and really significant daylight impacts are not unusual when we're looking at some of the other developments that have happened around and about. If a development is to take place in that environment where it gets to a sort of similar height to buildings around it, so I think that's been something else we've also been sort of mindful of, really.
Okay, and thank you. And the final bit on this is the fact that you've got a letter you put in the addendum that you must have received in the last few days. I think we heard mostly from the objector about that, and we've discussed it. You've considered all of those issues in there as part of your final thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean,
nothing new in here. That's what I'm saying.
No, it's a sort of expansion of the original letter, really. But we wanted to just make reference to it for sort of completeness, really. I think the final comment really is that there's not really an opinion between the different daylight sunlight consultants about the level of impact. They generally recognise that the numbers of rooms that are going to be adversely affected are that there's an agreement on that, as you can see in the sort of committee report. Really, it just comes down to a matter of judgment as to what is a reasonable level of impact in this kind of location, really.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Okay, just on this, I mean, we've had this before particularly in Shoreditch, where the most extreme example is a block where there was an unofficial car park next door, and they were proposing to build in it, and the objectors were saying, well, look at all the impact on our windows. But obviously there is going to be a big impact if there's currently nothing on the site and something is being built on the site. And what I can't quite get from this addendum report is it's not how much impact, it's what the ultimate levels of light are in the building that I think is the thing we have to think about. And I wonder if the officer could comment a bit further on that and these different methods of measuring things like average daylight factor and their suitability for this sort of purpose.
Okay, so
clearly, yeah. if you're currently next to a site where there isn't anything at the same level as you, building anything on it is going to have a big impact on you. It's whether you ultimately end up with something that's unacceptable in and of itself, not the amount of reduction from currently zero obstruction to something more than zero.
So what will it be like living in these rooms, I guess, is the question.
What these different ways of measuring vertical sky component versus this other one, ADF, is average daylight factor.
Yeah. How will it feel to live in there? You're asking, aren't you? How will it feel to live in there?
I think it's a matter of sort of a matter of judgment, really. You know, if I could sort of summarise, I suppose the applicant's argument is that the daylight impact is there are significant impacts, but it is to be expected given the sort of surrounding context, and if you compare it to a mirror image massing. And they also make mention of this average daylight factor, which is the most detailed way to calculate daylight, really, which takes into account the daylight within the whole room and window sizes and even how dirty a window is. Really, there's a sort of value you can attach to that as part of the formula. But that sort of average daylight factor is not normally applied to a new development, and when we'd be looking at, is there a reasonable level of daylight in this new development? There's a sort of, there's obviously an argument, there's different opinion of whether this should be used in this case. But, if you look at the average daylight factor assessment, it shows that something around 80 to 90% of the rooms within One Crown Place would meet that sort of average daylight factor level, which mean, which would be an acceptable level of daylight within a new residential development. So the objectors are saying you shouldn't really, you shouldn't place too much weight on that because, One Crown Place is nearly finished. You should focus more on the massive reductions in vertical sky component and and that it's below, this sort of mid-teen level, which is, sometimes considered to be a sort of acceptable kind of level, and when you get below that, it's unacceptable. They're just stressing that greater weight should be attached to different parts of the assessment, really. But our sort of view is as set out in the report, really.
Okay.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you for that. I've got some more. I think the Worship Street disabled parking was mentioned. That's a mistake, is it?
Steve, shall I come in there?
Yes, Kazim.
So we are trying to secure 2 disabled parking spaces, and the locations haven't been quite determined. So one could be on Wilson Street, it should say Wilson, and one on Christopher Street, but the locations haven't quite been exactly determined.
So the Worship Street is a mistake.
It is, yes.
That's a hell of a walk, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Okay. Just to say, the short stay, carriageway, Crown Place, all those acronyms, Steve, just to GIAs and LKDs and all of that really confused me somewhat. If we can just bear that in mind for another time. 6.3.55, I've put a note on that. 6.355. Okay, I think you've answered that. 4.43. Oh yes, one for Kazim, really. You talk about improved wayfinding. Legible London is a map-based system. I hope we get map-based wayfinding. The £60,000 to redistribute bicycles, Steve, what's that all about? And are we paying for the entirety of London's bicycle removing process?
I think, it's been requested by TfL. I mean, the application is referable to the GLA, and so they will give weight to the things that TfL are saying and asking for when the application gets to stage 2. So we do have to be a sort of bit mindful of that. I think the TfL have said that it's the docking stations in the vicinity of the site are some of the most highly used in London, and it's not necessarily completely about capacity, but it's about having the bikes in the right place at the right time and sort of efficiency in the system, and a contribution will help to sort of ensure that these docking stations near to the site are sort of like working effectively and the bikes are where they need to be.
Steve, is it fair to assign £60,000 to move bicycles to this development?
I mean,
is it a planning consideration?
It's something that will contribute to sustainable transport initiatives in the vicinity of the site. It is probably less than other developments have contributed towards TfL for other, they frequently get contributions for the cycle hire scheme, and this is probably less than they've secured on some of the other developments, like for instance 2 to 3 Finsbury Square, or Finsbury Square to the south in the City of London. I think that had a 200,000 contribution to cycle hire. So
okay. What do you think, Mr. Poole? What do you think of this £60,000 for the moving bicycles?
TfL seem to think it's reasonable.
Okay.
And
is it that for a year's worth of bicycle moving, or?
Absolutely no idea.
No idea, but you're happy to pay it.
I'm speaking on behalf of my client. I think they will pay it because they've been asked to.
Okay.
Nice place.
I wanted to point out that condition. 2 of the agreements now worth 1.35 million to us. How is the business?
Okay, that's okay. But it would be nice if it was 1.35 plus 60,000, though, wouldn't it? Perhaps we could do something more useful than moved by affordable workspace. So the affordable workspace is hugely expensive workspace down there. Is anybody else going to be able to use affordable workspace, whatever discount it's at?
Well, the applicants have, throughout the sort of process, they've been keeping us informed of the discussions they've been having with the affordable workspace providers, and so they've designed the space as a result of the sort of feedback and visiting some other developments, and so they consider that it is going to be a sort of lettable, attractive space for the affordable workspace providers, and that seems to be, that's also supported by our economic. Our sort of regeneration colleagues. There has been a bit of discussion about the amount of affordable workspace, because the policy requires 10% floor space based on gross area. That's where you get that GIA acronym, gross internal area. So the applicants, when you measure it by GIA, it's only 8%, so it's sort of not quite as meeting the 10% of the policy. But given the sort of where it is in the borough, and that in South Shoreditch with very high rent levels, it does seem like a good offer to have a greater rent reduction for the space. That could make it a bit more attractive.
Okay, Mr. Poole, who do you think is going to come and use your affordable workspace?
We've had a number of discussions with a number of affordable workspace operators, instigated by your head of regeneration. So, for example, it's Air Bikes and the Shoreditch Trust were very interested. The feedback we got was that they would rather have slightly less space but more affordable. Because your policy, as Stephen Fraser-Lim has said, you expect a 60% discount, and we're promoting a 75% discount to open market rates. So that was their view, and so hence that's why we ended up at 8% of gross internal area, but at a more significant discount.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, members?
I was just going to ask.
AJ.
The objector made an accusation saying that you're not considerate developers in terms of lighting. So how would you respond to that point that the objector made?
Well, I won't take it personally, but at every stage, and I think the officers involved in this project will acknowledge this, we've had regard to the impact upon our neighbours. And you'll see, because we presented to your committee twice at the pre-application scheme, how the proposal has evolved, and I would regard that as being considerate.
I think you presented to us once, the DPR.
I think we came to your committee twice, I think.
Did we?
Yeah, in 2019.
Okay. I know we saw it once and we thought it was too big. Okay. Right, any more questions, members? No? Okay. So the recommendation is to grant conditional planning permission, subject to completion of legal agreement and stage 2 approval by the GLA. All those in favour, please show. That is all of us. Thank you very much indeed. Right, we'll need to have a bit of a break. That's what we're told we should do. So if Mario, you can switch off for 5 minutes, okay?
Oh.
5 minutes, please, Mario. And we'll be back at 20:25, 26. Thank you.
Can I just say, I like being in real life.
That's a proposal on Monday, work police panel first by Zoom, and then in the lesson after.
Okay, we're okay. Mario, we're on. So thank you very much. Back from our break. So this is Ormsby Street and Pearson Street. We've got just the applicant here with us. So over to you, Nick, please.
Oh, right there.
Thank you. Let's go back to the start. Apologies for this. Okay. Can everybody see what we're talking about? The application is 2020-4117.
Hang on, Nick, there's nothing on our screens.
Is there not? It said it was presenting when you come out then.
Sometimes it takes a few seconds.
I'm pausing.
There's nothing on our screens.
Okay, let me come out of this and go back in now.
Okay.
Sorry, an error occurred when screen sharing. That's never happened before, so I assume it won't happen again.
Yeah, and it's not happened. This is the first time we haven't got the slide pack sent to us.
Okay.
Here we are. Hooray.
Very good. All right.
We're good. Good to go.
It's in the right place as well. Let me just get the laser pointer on so I can help you with that. Okay, so the application is 2020-4117 for land bound by Ormsby, Pearson and Howe Streets. This is a cleared site bounded by Pearson Street to the south, Ormsby Street to the east, and Howe Street to the north. It runs alongside the overground railway viaduct to the west at Hoxton Street Station, separated by the access alley to the rear of the railway arch businesses that front onto Jeffrey Street to the west. This is the aerial view towards the site looking northwest. Randall Kramer Primary School lies across Ormsby Street to the east. To the south may be seen a single-storey warehouse on a similar sized plot to the application site. The site isn't within a conservation area, but across the railway viaduct lies Kingsland Conservation Area and a residential terrace on the south side of Pearson Street here that's grade 2 listed. The proposal's for a temporary permission of 5 years. This would change the use from the storage of shipping containers to a mixed-use development consisting largely of office units with some storage units and a 44-bedroom hotel. These units would also be constructed of shipping containers. Here we're looking from the corner of Ormsby Street and Pearson Street. The site is located in a priority office area, which explains why the proposal contains a majority of office floor space. This photograph shows the current entrance arrangement to Howe Street to the north of the site. And this slide shows the poor quality of the existing boundary treatment and a 2-storey warehouse building that's subsequently been demolished. The ground floor plan of the proposal shows the general arrangement. This is the third application we've received for this site. The first application was for a hotel use and was withdrawn. The second application introduced office units, though in a lower proportion than can be seen here. And that application went through a number of revisions prior to the cyber attack on the council systems, at which point it was rendered unavailable. This new application reflects a priority office area that the site's in. 79 office units are proposed, and these are situated along the eastern boundary of the site over 3 levels. Additional office space is located at the upper 2 stories of this building at the Pearson Street entrance to the site. 11 B8 storage units are located next to the railway arches here, and the hotel provision has been reduced to 44 rooms over 3 stories here. The reception to the hotel is the bottom floor of this building again. 10% of the commercial units would be affordable workspace provided at 60% of the locality's market rent for the lifetime of the development. The first floor plan mirrors the second floor plan, again with office and the hotel. A first floor terrace adjacent to the railway arches was added to the proposal at the time of the last application and would provide amenity space for the office workers. The biodiversity of the site would be improved from the existing situation. The existing street trees on Ormsby Street would be retained and the site would be landscaped. Bird and bat boxes would be placed at east level with rubble piles, log piles and bug hotels in the amenity areas. Biodiverse roofs would also be provided. Although the units are shown here as quite constrained spaces, reflecting the shipping containers that are used for the construction and being intended to provide space for new and small companies in relatively low-cost accommodation, the units have a flexible wall system to allow enlargement of individual units as and when required. As is laid out in the committee report, the proposed standard of accommodation for the commercial occupiers is considered to be good. This slide shows part of the Ormsby Street elevation, where large windows to the office units provide good levels of daylighting for the workers. This site has been used for the storage of shipping containers throughout its recent history. So in that sense, the proposal doesn't represent a great change. Clearly, however, the proposed shipping containers, painted and opened up by windows, present a better appearance in the townscape than the existing use. The removal of the existing concrete boundary wall and its replacement by railings would also help in this regard. These show the elevations of the buildings across the whole site. As is laid out in the committee report, in design and conservation terms, the proposal is considered acceptable for a temporary development, given the existing use and the condition of the site. The proposal is only slightly higher than the adjacent railway viaduct, so the proposal would only be marginally visible through the railway arches from the conservation area and the Grade 2 listed terrace of Pearson Street on the other side. It's not drawn objection from the local Conservation Advisory Committee. The recommended conditions include a requirement to remove the buildings from the site when the temporary 5-year permission ends. And this reflects the fact that while the buildings are considered acceptable for a temporary use, they would not be acceptable as a permanent solution for this site, and that the proposed use should not be allowed to delay a future permanent proposal. In this respect, the recycled and recyclable construction of the design is a considerable benefit, with low embodied carbon and a quick construction period that can be replicated on any future site once the 5-year period has ended. This is the 3-storey temporary building at the Pearson Street entrance, providing a recognisable entrance to the site and the hotel reception at ground floor level. The cross-section at the bottom shows the hotel use on the left here and the office use on the right. The site has excellent public transport links and policy-compliant levels of cycle parking are proposed. 2 blue badge spaces are to be provided on the neighbouring roads prior to occupation. Coach parking or drop-offs would not be allowed within the times of operation of the controlled parking zone. Here we have a detail of the western elevation. The first floor terrace is here and here, with the office unit shown behind. And this is the hotel here, facing the railway viaduct in this instance. As is laid out in the committee report, the low height of the proposal and its positioning alongside the railway viaduct mean that there would be no significant amenity impact on neighbouring occupiers. The proposed hotel bedrooms are small and functional, reflecting their positioning as budgeted accommodation. Nevertheless, the units would be air-conditioned, connected to air source heat pumps, and they would be soundproof to ensure that they're not affected by the proximity of the railway line. Over this 5-year period, the 44 hotel rooms proposed will reduce the current level of need for hotel accommodation identified by the London Plan, and thereby reduce the pressure on other locations in the borough to provide hotel floor space at this time. And this gives a good sense of why it should be considered a good temporary use for the site. The recycled and recyclable nature of the construction and the provision of 65% of the development as offices and a further 7% of the site as storage units befits a priority office area. This represents a considerable uplift in the quantum and quality of jobs provided by the site and is augmented by the 44 hotel rooms. So to conclude, the proposed application is considered to be policy compliant. It brings an underutilised site into use prior to a permanent scheme coming forward and would use recycled and recyclable materials, enabling a quick dismantling of the site at the end of the 5-year period. The use is appropriate for the priority office area, and though the design of the development would not befit a permanent scheme, it would improve the setting of the period for the period of its use. As is detailed in the committee report, in these and other respects, the scheme is considered acceptable. It's recommended for approval subject to conditions in the legal agreement.
So, Michael and Liam?
Yeah. Hello. My name is Liam Murphy. I'm representing Snoozebox, which is part of the Portable Living Group. The Portable Living Group was set up 2 and a bit years ago. We absorbed Snoozebox, which went into administration in 2017. So we call ourselves expert in events. We build pop-up structures, and some festivals, movie crews. And then in 2018, we looked at semi-permanent deployment. So working with the Olympic Park in Stratford to build our first snooze box hotel, which opened the first day lockdown eased last year, which was interesting. But actually, it's gone a lot better than we could have even imagined. So we also have a hotel at the Eden Project in Cornwall. Again, not without its challenges. It's the most ecologically sensitive place we've ever built a hotel, but they're really happy with it, and that's in conjunction with the YHA. And we're looking now for our sort of next site, which will be hopefully Hoxton. So I'll hand you over to Michael now.
Thanks, Liam. Hi, I'm Michael Westwater. I work for Halliday Fraser Munro. We're a planning and architectural consultancy practice based across the UK. We're very pleased that Snoozebox have approached us to design and bring this new Snoozebox brand to Hackney, following on from the success of their other developments and their soon-to-open hotel at Canary Wharf. We're very pleased that the latest concept, which is this mixed-use development of the brand, is going to be hopefully brought to the benefit of the Hackney area. We've worked proactively with the officials, and particularly the case officer at this council, and we're very pleased to finally get to a stage where we've arrived at committee for a decision. The business units, as Nick had pointed out, they'll provide much needed affordable work space for the area. We anticipate this will appeal to a range of startups, small businesses and entrepreneurs in particular. And we anticipate that the development will create in the region of about 180 full-time and part-time positions once it's fully operational. The business-led development offers a mix of smaller single units, larger executive units, open plan office space and meeting rooms, which will also be offered for the community to access as well, providing maximum flexibility and allowing businesses to expand and grow as they develop, hopefully meeting local needs and demands in this area. The development will also provide storage solutions, continuing some of the previous use of the site. And the hotel element will provide a brand new concept budget model to this area, primarily targeting millennials and cost-conscious business customers, but also tourists, both local and international, who are wanting to come to London and may also find appeal in the brand. We feel the timing of this development will effectively help support this area's economic recovery following the consequences of COVID-19. As Nick had pointed out, it will also reinvigorate a derelict, stalled site, bringing it back into productive use until a more permanent solution is found by the owners. That will improve footfall in the area and will support other local businesses in the area as well. The 5-year temporary permission allows Snoozebox to trial this mix of uses and will help them diversify their portfolio of modular forms of development. Once the 5-year period has ended, the development can then be taken down in a very short time scale and will be relocated to an alternative site for reuse there. So the whole concept is highly flexible and adaptable, particularly in these challenging, uncertain and fast changing times. It will also hopefully complement many other businesses in the area and support activity that would otherwise not be there because of the derelict site. I'll finish there. We'd be very happy to answer any questions that you might have about the development.
Thank you. Members, questions? AJ.
Well, there's a couple of questions. The first is your interaction with the school. That's the main body, right? Ormsbury Street is going to be a school street. So I suppose my question to you, first of all, is deliveries. Like, if it's a school street, I know you've got streets on the side of that school street, but is there any way that you could limit deliveries during the school times? That's the first thing. The second thing is noise pollution from your thing. If the kids are out in the playground and there's massive noise pollution, that will have an impact on them. And I'm kind of disappointed that when I read this, you've just sent a letter to the school informing them of the development. You haven't actually met with them, have you?
We have actually met with them.
And you've explained...
Hang on. There's 3 questions there, so you need to talk through The chair.
Okay.
Okay. So we've got 3 questions there. The first was about, are you aware of the school street issue, and have you do you intend to respond to that in terms of the traffic and transport issues?
Yeah.
If you could answer that.
Yeah. So in terms of the school, we have no intention of sort of causing a hassle to anyone in the area, so we're happy to limit deliveries. And also the back of the site, which is the Howe Street entrance, is quite quiet, and it's where we had planned to have our bin store and stuff, so it actually wouldn't directly affect the school.
Yeah. There will be a operational management plan, which I believe is conditioned as part of the application. That, you know, very happy to limit deliveries out with school times. I mean, that makes complete sense for safety reasons, absolutely.
And the noise pollution?
You were concerned about the kids being too noisy.
No, you were concerned about the other way around, weren't you?
Yeah, if they're out in the playground, you know, during breaks,
Yep.
there'd be excessive noise pollution while they're in.
Okay, so will it affect your development, I guess, is the question.
Will the children affect our development?
I think AJ was asking the question the other way around, Chair.
Oh, are you?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, could we limit the construction during children's break times when they're in the playground? I think once they're in the building,
yeah,
they're protected from noise, but when they're in the playground outside, if there's excessive noise, it will have an impact on them.
You're talking about construction
noise,
period,
or-
are you?
Yeah.
Oh, while you're building it. Okay.
None of the actual structures will be constructed on site. It's all prefabbed accommodation or prefabbed units, which we have in stock already. So the first phase, sort of hotel phase, will be built in about a month. Second phase, which is the office units, will take about 2 months. And it really is just a crane and our build team that'll be there. It's not a labour intensive.
So there's no construction as such. They're just delivering these shipping containers to the site and plopping one on top of each other.
Basically.
We do tend to try and do that at weekends, the bulk of it at weekends, so we can close the road and again, not to disturb the local area.
Subject to getting permission as well today, and obviously being able to adequately address all the conditions, it may be the opportunity that it could be largely constructed during the summer holiday period when the school's up as well.
Shall we ask Kazim that? Kazim, have you worked out when they're going to be able to deliver these boxes to the site?
Thanks, Chair. I think what we've worked out is when they can't deliver, and that's definitely the school operational times. And outside so they would have to kind of work around the school streets, as council has pointed out. So I think within the recommendations, we've got the delivery and servicing plan that specifically wants the proposal to be worked up around the school operations, as well as a construction logistics plan, which will then look at the details of how this can be constructed with very little to no impact on the local community.
Okay, and the final question was about consultation with the school. We understand you don't have to consult the school outside the statutory process, but we wonder whether you did and why you didn't, I guess.
We have actually met the school, yeah. So we met them once when we were planning to build a hotel, and the principal was pretty positive about it. And at the time, they had quite a lot of issues with fly tipping, so they were happy to see something just to be done on site.
Just one more question.
Go on then.
Right. The other question is about the demand for these business units, because 2 minutes away from you, Guy Nicholson is going to be converting York Row Estate garages into business units, and I just wonder, what have you done a report into demand? It'd be interesting to know, with all this stuff happening close to you, all these garages being converted to business units, as well as your business units on top of that.
Okay. So there's a couple of elements to that. Snoozebox have reviewed the employment supply demand report that was produced by Hackney Council during their local plan review and update. A company called Hatch prepared a marketing assessment report, which has been lodged along with the application, proving that there is a need and demand in the area for startup business units, affordable business units in particular. And this is one of the benefits that this development will bring because of the secondary, tertiary street location It will, and the nature of the modular development, it will not attract a premium rental value that you would expect with standard office uses. And lastly, Snoozebox have also touched base with Guardians of the Arches and the Small Traders Guild,
East End Traders Guild,
and reached out to universities as well to find out, whether graduates would have an interest in these things. And from speaking to those organisations, they identified another latent demand. The 5-year temporary timescale as well allows it to be trialled, obviously, to make sure that this mix of uses is appropriate. At the end of the 5-year period, if it's not, the development will be moved on. So,
what's your timescale for being on site?
The construction period at the longest is 2 months, but generally the shipping containers are moved on site in around 4 to 6 week period. There's then internal works, which is including wiring and plumbing and connection to the mains and things like that. So it's very quick turnaround, and equally at the end of the process, the containers are just restacked onto lorries and they're moved off site.
Thank you. Any more questions? Councillor Hanson.
I mean, it's more just interest than material. I mean, I think if you're going to have an outside terrace facing a railway line, I can see why that's not going to cause as much disruption to other people. Out of pure interest, will the hotel sort of have a bar and restaurant open to non-residents?
Yes. Yeah.
So the outside terrace could actually be quite heavily used and in pleasant weather.
Yeah, that's what we hope. And the hotel that we have at Stratford has quite a nice outdoor terrace area, which we're utilising at the moment.
So the hotel has its own space adjacent to the reception area that would serve the need of guests. The roof terrace is primarily designed to serve the office uses and are more back entrance uses. It's not to say that it couldn't be potentially utilised by some hotel guests, but obviously it's about keeping various elements within the development, providing a degree of separation as is appropriate.
I should probably mention at this point that the operational management plan looks at the use of the terrace, so that's something that we could consider in full at the next stage.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have an outside terrace, I can't think of a better place than next to a railway line where it's not going to. It appears unlikely to disturb other residents. I mean, I'm just interested in this principle of temporary use, which I'm not opposed to in any way. I'm just wonder whether we'll get this sort of when we've given permission for temporary use for other things, at the end of the period of time, there's this sort of, but how could you possibly let us have this thing temporarily and then take it away again?
Yes.
There tends to be sort of people using unused sites for community gardens and things like that. But given that this isn't liable for SIL and things like that, is there a risk that it just becomes a way of getting round stuff about whether it would be acceptable if it was permanent and whether it would be liable for SIL? I'm not opposed to the principle of this. I'm just worried about whether we're setting precedents or sort of.
Will it remove
discretion?
Remove the pressure for development, permanent development, I guess, as well is an issue. So where do you see it going, Nick, in 5 years' time? Is this definitely, is it going to move on and we're going to get another development, or?
So we know that there isn't anything in the pipeline just yet. One of the reasons that you might have seen Box Park, for instance, last quite a long time is because there was always going to be a development there, but the development kept getting refused. Yeah. So it was still needed as a temporary use. It was still using that site. Now here we've been quite strong in the condition that requires dismantling at the end of the 5-year period. It's clear to everybody what they're getting into. We have stated that we think that the development wouldn't be suitable as a permanent, because of its design, a permanent fixture in this location. I think that everybody's going into this with their eyes open. In 5 years' time, if we do decide that we've completely changed our minds, then that's one thing. We get another application to consider it. But at the moment, this is a 5-year project, and so we're expecting in 5 years for it to come down. But it's a good use of the site in the meantime, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a fine use of the site in the meantime. It's just like, it's the what happens in 5 years and what might happen I was interested in. So let's say in 5 years' time, this gentleman came back and said, can we now apply to make this a permanent fixture on the site.
Mhm.
Would we then be sort of constrained by considerations about whether shipping containers were acceptable on a permanent basis and that sort of thing?
In no way. We've made quite clear that this is acceptable as a temporary development, and it's one of the reasons it's acceptable is because it's a shipping container site, and they're putting better looking shipping containers back onto the site. But it's not what you'd expect to see in a permanent development. But as a temporary development, it has a lot going for it in terms of the fact that it can be taken down quickly, that we've got low embodied carbon. If you were to put up a temporary development, this is what you'd really want it to look like. But no, we wouldn't be constrained. And in a way, a lot of the things that we have foregone for this application, because it's a temporary development, would be expected of a permanent development, such as improvements to the public realm, things like that. That we would be looking for a permanent development to introduce more than this one does, because we don't think it's reasonable to expect this to do everything that a permanent development would do.
Okay, I've got two questions. One is to Kazim, the EV charging point. Those pavements are narrow. Is the charger going to go on the carriageway?
Yes, it will, sir.
Okay. And the other thing is to commend paragraph 6.63, which Councillor Levy would welcome, because it does say exactly what we want to say and have been saying about disabled parking over the years.
Prior to occupation as well.
That it should be there because people might want to turn up and use it. Whatever the other issues around, you can use it in permanent bays. So thank you, Nick, and whoever's written that. We hope to see that in the future. One comment to the developer. There's one development that went ahead next to a railway that was delayed for months and months and months because they didn't get an oversailing license for their cranes. So do please make sure your crane people, if we choose to support this, know what they're getting themselves in for, or you should maybe find yourself in a bit of a mess.
We've had a number of site visits and stuff to plan out how
Okay.
how it is.
Right, so no more questions? No,
we should probably make something clear before we do. So thank you for the comment on the blue badge parking. The EV charging point we didn't put in the end because we didn't think it was reasonable to do that. Kasim thought it was thought it was something that we should be doing, but we didn't think it was reasonable to ask it of the applicant, given that is something that would happen as part of the permanent development.
You could use that 60,000 that's going to be spent on moving bicycles around, perhaps.
Sorry, I'm sure it's here, but presumably the construction management plan will take account of the school street, and we don't need to. We can just. I
think that's been said and assumed. Is that right, Kazim?
Yeah. Firstly, apologies for that overlooking. We've discussed that before about the EV, but yes, the delivery and servicing and the CLP would both take into account the current conditions, which include the school street.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the recommendation is to grant planning permission. Should it say to be grant temporary planning permission subject to conditions and legal agreement? Is it all right to say that, Christine? Should the recommendation be temporary?
It is temporary.
So the recommendation summary should be amended, should it, to grant temporary planning permission? Or is that just...
Is this at the bottom of the committee report?
Okay, so you're happy for me to read that out? Grant planning permission, yes. Recommendation summary says grant planning permission. It doesn't say grant temporary planning permission.
Well, it's a condition of the permission. If you want to make clear that it's a temporary planning permission, I would, I think it would be advisable.
Okay. Okay, so we are granting temporary planning permission subject to conditions and legal agreement. All those in favour, please show. That's all of us. Thank you very much indeed. We look forward to your snooze box.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to everybody, officers and anybody out there that's watched us through this evening. We have got something else. We've got delegated decisions and to note the dates of the planning subcommittee for the following rest of the year. So essentially, we've got 2 meetings in July, 1 in September, 1 in October, November, and December. January, February, March, April, May the 4th. That seems a bit election
Star Wars Day.
close. When's the elections? So I think you should rethink May the 4th, Andrew.
The elections are May the 5th. Then yes.
Nobody will be here. Okay. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. How did May the 5th get forward?